This episode is brought to you by Chaos Labs, one of the leading on-chain risk management firms. You'll be hearing more from them later in the show. This episode is brought to you by Ledger, the most secure hardware wallet trusted by 7 million users and securing 20% of the world's digital assets. We'll be hearing more from them later in the show. This episode is brought to you by Renaud Partners, the premier go-to-market advisory firm for early-stage crypto teams. Thanks to them for making this episode possible. Hey Lightspeed listeners, we need your help. Lightspeed is conducting an audience survey to help us get a better picture of who our listeners are and what you want to see from the show. Think of this as our annual review. What do you like about the show? What could we improve on? If you want to contribute, visit the link in our show notes to fill out the survey and help us make a better show for you. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. I'm your host, Jack Kubanek, alongside Memetics, and we're joined today by Jon Charbonneau, the co-founder and general partner of DBA, a prolific writer, and also a friend of the pod. Jon, thanks for coming on the show.
How's it going? Good to be back on.
And a concern or the new thing. Did you see that?
Yeah, it's the new meme. This should help me going on increasingly unaligned podcasts to talk about the same thing. Going bankless, Gort, and then Lightspeed in order. I'm sure this will help.
The radicalization of Jon Charbonneau. We're part of it. So, Jon, as you might be aware, you wrote a blog post recently about Ethereum's North Star problem. And you've talked about this on multiple podcasts now. But I guess I want to come into like a similar conversation here through a slightly different window. And, you know, this is a Solana podcast. We talk about Solana a lot. And in that piece, you dedicate a little bit of time to just talking about Solana as an example of a protocol that does have a clear North Star as a decentralized NASDAQ. So I guess I just want to start and ask you to like defend that position or explain what Solana has in terms of a clear North Star that Ethereum sort of lacks as things are currently constructed.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I think that, all of this started with Solana as the clear example. I think Kyle was probably the first one who was talking about this for the past year or so, and who communicated it quite well. Of Solana very clearly from the start has just always been designed with a very clear vision that was always very clearly articulated the whole time. Everyone understood it. It's one of those things that, you could love it or you can hate it. You know, some people think the decentralized NASDAQ thing is dumb or it's not valuable or whatever. But you fundamentally, you know what it is. Totally has been very clear from the start of, we want to build the world's best price discovery engine. You know, it gives this specific example of, if, an event happens in Singapore, by the time that message gets to New York, there should also be a trade on the Solana network. That's kind of acting on that information. And so you have this big global state machine where everyone has permissionless access to the same information and you're all on an even playing field. So that is a very clear vision in mind. And so again, you could say that's a good or a bad thing. I like that vision. I don't like that vision. But it's clear nonetheless. I am in the camp of, I think it's very cool. And so when you have that in mind, it makes it very obvious, okay, this is what we're building for. You can very literally ask yourself after that, then, okay, what are the properties that we need to build for that thing? What does the system very specifically look like, need to look like to provide that kind of end use case, that North Star that we're building towards? And so, you see that very clearly reflected when, whenever anyone in Solana is talking about, like very literally just kind of upgrade to the chain, what proposals should we be implementing? It is, this is the use case that we're building towards, fundamentally, what are the properties that we need to do this? We want to increase bandwidth, reduce latency. Obviously, those are fundamental to any kind of global price discovery engine. And, all the conversations of multi-proposer, multiple concurrent leaders, different names for it. And Solana, they very logically fit into this framework of, what they're trying to build. And then we can, break down this proposal and say, does this give us exactly that product that we're trying to build that, this, makes proposers, more cheaply communicate information between each other? Does it give us those properties that we want? And so that's whether it's, we'll see if multi-proposer ends up being a good idea or not, but you have a very logical framework to evaluate these things and decide, should we implement them? And then you kind of contrast that to Ethereum, where in general, I would say that there's directly less clarity about, what is the very fundamental purpose of this network? And there's a mix of, more agnosticism towards use cases, but also then even what is the network itself? What is the role of Ethereum L1 kind of in this role of this whole, all the computation that's being done? And so when you fundamentally have less disagreement on, hey, what is Ethereum L1 supposed to be? Is it this thing where we just post a bunch of proofs for these L2s? And it's okay if it's super slow, it doesn't need to do a lot. That's one vision. Another vision is, the max types who are now, I guess, on the Solana side, who are no, we should make the L1 performant. We should be able to do finance on chain. That gives you a very different end game. And so as a result of that, if you try to evaluate something like multi-proposer, it doesn't fundamentally make sense, that argument, if you don't even agree on, what are the end properties that you want. And so really every kind of technical debate that you often have in most of these systems are always downstream of, what are we literally building for? And in general, I'd say Solana is on the very good end of this pretty high degree of clarity of, what are we building for? What are the properties we want? Let's say Bitcoin is very similar. And then on the farther end of Ethereum, where I think there's a lot more ambiguity because it's a mix of it trying to do a lot of things and there's just generally less agreement over what we're trying to do.
At least for me, when I first heard about Ethereum as like a college kid, it was pitched to me as, well, it's basically Bitcoin, but it's better than Bitcoin because you can run smart contracts on it. And so there's actually a use, whereas Bitcoin has no real use. And so it was pitched to me as you should buy ETH. And that strikes me as like, and you touch on this in the article, it's the world computer. And that is like a story that worked for a while for Ethereum. And it became, very popular, the largest smart contract blockchain by market cap by a lot. And obviously now it has a bit of a North Star problem, as you're pointing out, and that story didn't prove sustainable. And Solana, by the same token, it's fast and cheap. And you have lots of newer alt L1s or layer 2s that are pitching themselves as also being fast and cheap. And they're essentially trying to compete in the same lane that Solana is, and they argue that they can do it better. So do you think that Solana North Star is sustainable, or is it going to need to evolve in the same way that a lot of people are arguing Ethereum's story needs to evolve right now?
So it's interesting. Some of this is, part of what I'm going to say is, I think, hard for me to answer because I was not around at the beginning. But my general sense is that Ethereum never quite had the same degree of clarity that Solana had, even at the start of Ethereum. So it's not just an evolution of the kind of, narrative or North Star of Ethereum. I think that it has generally been less clear throughout most of its history. This isn't just something that's, kind of new in the last couple of years because, we got to change because Solana's new competition. Versus Solana, I would say, it's very clearly from the start. The pitch books for, Solana, apparently that's all he was selling around. It was blockchain at Nasdaq speed, and this was what he was always talking about at the beginning. So I would say it's always been there. It's always been consistent. So I would say that is one major difference. I don't quite think Ethereum has ever had that degree of clarity. I think it's gotten a little bit more challenged over the past couple of years, particularly as it's just gotten more decentralized. More people have differing opinions on the thing. Whether Solana is sustainable, I definitely think it's sustainable. It's just a matter of can you win at that thing, obviously, because there are a lot of new competitors, and I think that there are very valid competitors to Solana, and that will be the big question for this over time. Is there a real network effect to most of this stuff? Enough that at least is able to fight off the new competitor continuously. When you get to the super end state of this thing, as the further that we get into this, what is the best decentralized NASDAQ? When you ask the question now, I think we are certainly still in the stage where you can meaningfully differentiate yourself, as a new kind of a newcomer right now. I think you can offer a meaningfully better product experience, meaningfully better technical performance, meaningfully better distribution, all of these things compared to what I would say is the incumbent, which is Solana right now. I definitely think we're still in that phase where you can offer a significant improvement, and where the stickiness of the existing solution, Solana, where there's a ton of users, there's a lot of liquidity, but it's not, insurmountable. And so I think we're definitely still in that stage. And then, what does the end state look like when you play this forward, another 10, 20 years? Both of those just get harder and harder over time, where you assume whatever the biggest incumbent is at that stage, they're going to have much more of a network effect. They're going to have a lot more users. They're going to have a lot more liquidity. It's going to be a little bit more annoying to move off of that. And at the same time, the incremental improvement over whatever is the best thing that we've built in the next 10 years, probably going to get a lot smaller versus the incremental improvements over something like Solana today. Nobody is trying to argue that what Solana is right now is the perfect end state of finance. Governments are not going to come on chain to get sandwich attacked. That's obviously not what anyone thinks. And so, these are not static. All of these systems are changing. Solana is rapidly evolving. But yeah, TLDRs, I think it's a very clear and sustainable vision. But I think we're certainly still on the stage where someone else can win in that vision. I think it would be pretty hard to argue otherwise.
Chaos Labs, the leading on-chain risk management firm, recently launched its new flagship Oracle product, Edge, which delivers integrated, high-precision risk and price data for any on-chain application with a market. Edge emerged from stealth after 2 months securing Jupiter, the top swap platform on Solana, already securing $30 billion in volume and more than 60% of all Solana perps volume. Edge is comprised of 3 components: price, risk, and proofs. It delivers high-precision price data with an integrated risk engine powered by Chaos's advanced outlier and anomaly detection algorithm. It automates delivery of real-time parameter adjustments on-chain based on current market conditions, and it enables the secure on-chain delivery of custom data points, including reserve attestations delivered via ZKPs. Most recently, Wintermute announced its selection of the Edge Proofs Oracle for Outcome Market, its new smart contract-based election prediction market tool. Thank you to Chaos Labs for making this episode possible. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger remains the most secure hardware wallet for your Solana and logins, trusted by 7 million users and securing 20% of the world's digital assets. In recent years, Ledger has built a robust ecosystem of products and services, making digital ownership more secure and accessible to everyone. Ledger's newest devices, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex, feature the world's first secure touchscreens, making it easier and safer to manage your Solana transactions and coins. With Ledger Live, you can seamlessly and securely manage and stake your SOL. Alongside Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex, Ledger introduced the Ledger Security Key app, a safer alternative to traditional passwords, enhancing your overall digital security. During the holiday season, upgrade to Ledger Flex and get $70 in Bitcoin. Hurry, because this offer is only valid until December 23rd while supplies last. Everybody knows there's a massive shortage of top senior marketers in crypto, and teams are constantly struggling to get their go-to-market done right. Renaud Partners is the premier go-to-market advisory firm for early-stage crypto teams. They help top founders tell their stories better and build great non-technical teams. They advise founders on all things market, tight brand positioning, community building, social media, and building A+ internal teams. They work with some of the top projects across Solana, Monad, Ton, Base, and others. Renaud Partners has built the most elite network of native crypto marketers globally. They create custom expert teams to support founders with transformative strategy work. Some of the best founders, VC firms, and ecosystem leaders in the business trust Renaud Partners to help their teams expedite their marketing success and catalyze their growth. If you're a founder or a VC looking for support for your teams, I highly recommend connecting with them. You can learn more at renaudpartners.com.
So you've outlined Solana's vision and how it's clear, and perhaps how Ethereum's has never been too clear and has had tidbits of clarity, but never really, let's say, converged. One, what is, you obviously outlined this in the blog, but what is your, I believe you outlined it as world computer, but what does that really mean, and what makes you think that's the right vision? And two, this is a bit harder, but do you think it's actually valuable to have a clear vision for a blockchain? And what I mean by that is something that tends to happen with especially countries or companies is you tend to get very comfortable with one mission statement and you start doing that. For example, Intel with memory chips, and then microprocessors come, and then you're like, oh shit, now we have to change our entire thing. And so perhaps the chaos is somewhat useful, or it could be useful. So what is the counter, I guess, to, or can you justify why you think having a clear mission statement is actually important for a blockchain?
One part of it is I don't think that you need to have, this is something that I think is confused a lot in this debate is I don't think that you need to have just, one narrow niche that you're going after. I would say there's kind of two broad disagreements within the Ethereum prioritization right now. Is one half of it is, should we be doing everything? Like there's generally a view. I remember perfectly captured the example I've given is, David tweeted out, Ethereum's North Star roadmap or whatever is bigger blocks than Celestia, better money than Bitcoin, better execution than Solana. And then, Kobe replying to that, man who chases two rabbits catches neither. So that's one argument is, should we have all these different things that we're trying to do? because maybe trying to do too many of them, it's too much, and we're just going to losing all of them. We're not going to be best at any of them. The other half of it is, I don't think that we have a strong agreement on any of those. I think there's a lot of people who disagree on the moneyness thing in Ethereum. There's a lot of people who do very directly want to compete head on with Bitcoin. There's a lot of other people who are generally of the view that, we don't really care if this thing is money, or maybe somewhere in the middle of, we sort of care, but it's more of a byproduct of success. Same thing with Solana. There's people who very clearly want to directly head on compete with Solana on the L1. A bunch of people just, we don't really care. Let the L2s go do that. Same thing with Celestia. There's a lot of people who think DA is super important. That's where all the money is going to come from in the long run. And then there's another half of the Ethereum community that says, the DA cash flow stuff is never going to matter. We just want this thing to be money anyway. So we're cool if all the L2s go use all DA. It doesn't matter. So that's the half that I think is more concretely the problem right now, is that I think there's disagreement over all of them. And I think that disagreement is good and healthy for a period of time, and particularly when it resolves. And that's fine to change, what your purpose is around the edges over time. Bitcoin was the perfect example of this that I kind of had in there. Is, there were fights certainly throughout Bitcoin's history, and a lot of them particularly led up to the block size wars, where there was a degree of a divergent vision of, what should Bitcoin be doing? Is it more in this direction of digital gold, or is it more in this direction of digital cash right now, where we need to scale the L1 and, let everyone have cheap Bitcoin transactions? And they fought it out, and they cleanly resolved, and each went their own way. And then the market decided which is the better solution. The challenge with Ethereum is a lot of these issues have just been kind of sitting around for a while, and there hasn't been a clear resolution to a lot of them. And so the result of that generally ends up being inaction, which, if you're Bitcoiny, may end up being fine. Bitcoin can afford to be super slow because it's money, it's network effects, it's all about the story. It doesn't need to change a lot. So you could probably be okay with that. The challenge with Ethereum is I don't think anyone can out Bitcoin. I don't think that Ethereum or any of these other chains right now can just not make any changes and just try to, pitch itself as our better money than Bitcoin because our economics are XYZ and theirs are like this. I don't think that works. I do think pretty much all these other chains other than Bitcoin need to be pretty rapidly evolving and competing with each other because they all have pretty credible competition, all these different dimensions. And so if you need to move quickly and you need to be agreed on what we're doing, at least reasonably quickly, then you need some degree of, agreement / what is a North Star that we're building towards. Because otherwise, very concretely, if Ethereum just ossified right now and didn't ship anything else in the future, my assumption is it would be surpassed at some point in the next few years, and it would probably just go away, and it would no longer be competitive or relevant in the field. I don't think it's at a stage where it can ossify. Same thing is true for Solana, same thing for all these other chains. If Solana ossified today, my assumption is it would be irrelevant in a few years from now, for all intents and purposes. And so that's where kind of Ethereum is that they're still a very competitive stage. And so if you're in a stage where you need to ship, to some meaningful degree, you kind of need to know what you're building towards. And then the other half of that I describe as kind of the marketing side of it, is, having a clear vision. It just makes it a lot easier to be able to attract new people into the ecosystem to get excited about it. And that's everyone. That's, if you want to sell your thing as, ETH is money, Bitcoin is money. Fundamentally, that's just marketing. It's a story. We need to have a clean, coherent story. If we don't even agree on what the story is, you're not going to pitch it to investors. Same thing with trying to attract builders, getting people excited. Hey, this is what we're building. It's very simple, big, fast, cheap chain. Those are all the fragmented ones. Come build here. It's a pretty simple, easy story. And same thing for all the users too. They don't have to think about all this, it's not clear what this thing is versus these people are telling me, it's very simple. I go here, I trade, it's cheap, it's fast, that works. So it's kind of a mix of those two things where I think it clearly does benefit. Bitcoin can get away with not having that kind of fast movement right now, but even they have the clarity of the story. So I definitely think it does help a lot, and it's quite important.
So Jon, you put out this piece, and I believe you said in another podcast or maybe on Twitter that you were expecting more pushback than you got, or it was maybe more well received than you expected.
I might revise that a week later, but yes, I did say that.
Okay. Well, either way, and I also spoke with Max Resnick recently after he left the Ethereum world and came to Anza. And I guess for both of you, you're individuals who have experienced pushback from the Ethereum world for maybe expressing contrarian views about Ethereum's development and this kind of thing. There's another thing that I believe, which is that crypto Twitter is like a small segment of everyone in crypto, and it's non-representative. So I guess I'm just curious to broaden the scope or to zoom out for a second. When we talk about, like Solana is more pragmatic, Ethereum is more resistant to change, there are all these politics of what you can and can't say. How much of that is like for crypto Twitter accounts that just have outsized mind share because they get a lot of engagement? And how much of that is in fact the reality of everyone in the quote unquote Ethereum ecosystem?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny. So the quote that I imagine you're referencing at first of me saying that was it was on the Gore podcast, which I recorded. I recorded it a little over a week ago. I think I recorded it Saturday last week. And it just came out though, yesterday on this Sunday. Yeah. And in that one, it was interesting. I had said that, the reception was much more positive than I actually expected. My base case was closer to what I got this week. So it was interesting. The initial reaction the first week was very clearly led by multiple people at the EF who strongly agreed with it. I mean, people like Donkrod who had quoted it as yes, this is generally correct. This is a correct analysis of what is going on. This is areas for improvement that we have. It was funny. Columbia Crypto Economics, the conference was that week. Most of the EF was there. I mean, most of the very Ethereum aligned, big investors and projects were there. I spoke to all of them in person, and most of them were generally in pretty strong agreement with most of it as well. Very constructive conversation. It was funny. And then this week was interesting. This week was those 4 influencer accounts on Twitter more directionally. It was disappointing because effectively none of it was actually in relation to any of the content. It was just the very classic example of, I will say, the Ethereum community quote concocting purity tests, as some have phrased it before in the past. It was very much that of, we shouldn't listen to outsiders. This is just people who have ulterior motives. We shouldn't listen to any criticism, basically. If you're not just holding ETH, we just shouldn't listen to you. You obviously want us to fail. And so it's difficult for me to assess. I mean, I am someone who does go back and forth at times I mean, very clearly, whenever you speak to people at the F for most of these core devs, a lot of the core builders in person, most of them are very rational. They're very critical of these points. They will speak about them very coherently, take the criticism, understand, how, hey, we agree. These are what we're thinking of how we can improve these things. And then, most of, I would say, Ethereum crypto Twitter is just preaching about how ETH is money and just doesn't really accept any criticism. It's difficult for me to assess, what is the exact balance of actually how many people are in each of those camps, and what does that lead to over time. I mean, my general sense is that the Twitter stuff, it's certainly not representative. I think most of the people that I interact with personally, and who I think are the more, I would say, people who are driving more of the changes very literally. But at the same time, I mean, I think that they do have a very meaningful impact, honestly, on the protocol and its perception of, very concretely, as someone who came into Ethereum, came into crypto, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years ago, something like that, or whatever. Most of what I saw at that point, for example, coming in and seeing Bitcoin, was as just all these crazy Bitcoin maxis screaming on Twitter and just calling everything a scam and how their project is this holy thing. And I basically just didn't pay attention to it that much for the next couple of years. It was just, this thing makes sense as a macro bet, but I mean, I'm not excited. I'm not getting involved in this community. The point where that changed was over the past year. And Bitcoin in the past year, I have gotten very excited and have spent a lot of time in it. We have started doing research and investing there. As a result of, there's now a lot more smart and pragmatic people who are just, we're going to build scaling projects. We're, the whole kind of, Bitcoin 2.0 renaissance, whatever you want to call it, where there's been a lot more just, we're going to do fun projects. We're going to do cool stuff on Bitcoin. And so very, very concretely, I do think that has a serious impact in being able to attract people to the ecosystem. I mean, you see this very clearly with, some of the handful of announcements of people who have announced that they are shifting, from an Ethereum L2 to Solana, a variety of different meme coin projects and kind of more social, more degen-y type projects have explicitly stated, a big part of the reason why we're moving is we do not feel culturally accepted in this place. It feels very, ivory tower researchy and just sort of looking down on you, very kind of religious sentiment. And so I I certainly think it's important not to paint, every, core person in Ethereum as the furthest end of, the Ethereum maxi that you see on Twitter. But at the same time, I do think it is genuinely rather detrimental to Ethereum that that is the first thing that most people will see when they, come into Ethereum from the outside. And I think that has negative impacts.
Well, no one cares what you say, John. You're a joke in Ethereum inner circles.
It's true. Very proud of it in the bio now.
Oh, is it? Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I want to wrap up talking about Ethereum and talk about what's wrong with Solana. Before I do that, the other part of that comment, of course, was at least attempt to hide your ulterior motives. So perhaps this isn't explicitly stated, but I think you probably do need to explicitly state it for some CT people. What was your motive in writing that piece? What drove you to write it?
So it's a mix of things. One is that, people have pointed this out, and it's certainly corrective. This is just they're talking for marketing or branding or whatever like that. I'll be honest, that is a reason to write for anyone. That is certainly a part of why I will write any single piece that I will write. Is I think it is useful, and I think that more people in crypto should write. That's the reason why I started writing before I got into cryptos, because I thought that was the most useful way to build a brand. So as a completely self-interested part, I will say that yes, absolutely. Part of why I write anything is I think it is generally helpful for us as a firm and as an individual. So part of it's that. Why write specifically this piece, which I think is more of the question, is a mix of things. I'd say two parts. One is actually not unique to this, is also kind of the same for all my pieces. Is at least half of it is just for my entirely personal use of, even if I never hit publish on this thing, would I want to write this thing to clarify my own thoughts? And the answer is yes. Generally, the way that I learn best in clarifying my own thoughts is doing long form writing and really digging down into what my thoughts are over time, and really forcing yourself to put them all out on paper and, question all of your thoughts when you really put them all out there logically. And makes it much easier to poke holes in your logic and kind of rearrange your thoughts. So part of it was that. And then the other half of it, I would say, was, I think that this is correct. I think it is generally helpful for everyone in crypto to hear. And so why not publish it as a result of that? I'd say the first two parts are unique, are not unique to this post. The latter part of it, I would say, is more to this one of, it's one of those things that I would say, I knew that a number of people would get annoyed at it. But I clearly think it's correct, and I think it's helpful, as evidenced by most of the people who read it, who are close to the situation on this. So, very simply, I think it would be helpful for Ethereum if people do actually kind of take this in more and try to improve in those things. Very literally, as I wrote in the piece, we are heavily invested in a lot of the stuff in the Ethereum ecosystem, across both L1 apps, L2s. That includes liquid investments, illiquid investments, a mix of both. So very concretely, I would like to see Ethereum do better than it has over the past couple of years, and kind of improve and make it a better place for those applications and for those builders. And that's not mutually exclusive with any of those other projects doing well. We're also invested in the other projects that I mentioned in there. Ethereum doing well doesn't have to make Bitcoin go down or any of these other projects.
And just as a quick aside related to this, how much does this sort of writing and, thinking about L1 and L2 value capture and all these sorts of questions, how much do they really matter in the meme finance world we live in, where Trump media is trading at an insane valuation as a money losing business, or Fartcoin is crossing however many billions in market cap? Do you think that these tokens, ETH and Sol, Bitcoin, are actually going to trade based on these more rational or explicable measures that you're trying to pull out, or I don't know, do any of these questions really matter, I guess is what I'm getting at.
So for the two different pieces you mentioned, the last two, I'd say it's somewhat different answers. For the last one, to some degree, but mostly not. Certainly for these L1 based assets. As I tried to clearly state in the piece, no one is valuing, ETH based on what is a DCF of its MEV right now. Does it matter concretely? Yes. And even as a direct example for Solana and Ethereum, for example, the L1, L2 token value capture was less about, can we put a DCF on Solana based on, what these fees are? No, I don't think that's generally the right approach. But I think that you draw very different conclusions about, for example, what does issuance mean in a blockchain context based on what I wrote versus what a lot of other people wrote. I have tried to argue before if the issuance is a cost, directionally, I don't want to spend too much time on that. But very concretely, you draw very different conclusions and you would change your issuance policy in a different way as a result of what you believe based on, what are the general financial flows in the system. And so that last piece colors a lot of my thought of very literally, what do I think Ethereum should do with its issuance? What do I think Solana should do with its issuance? And I have differing opinions from a lot of other people as a result of basically what I wrote in that piece. So I think very literally, yes, it absolutely has concrete implications. For this newer one, kind of as I stated in the piece, to be clear, none of this matters in the short to medium term of, we're not going to bump up the gas limit 20% and then ETH is going to go to 10K and Wall Street loves us and blah, blah, blah. Very simply, ETH is going to go up in the next 3 to 6 to maybe 12 months if there are more buyers and sellers and people want to buy the ETF. That's about it. Most of this other stuff does not matter. This is all a longer term concern, which I think concretely in the long term makes a huge difference. Once we start taking, 6, 12, 24 months, whatever, does it matter on that time range? If you have a coherent story that you can pitch to people, yes, it absolutely does. Does it matter at that kind of time range if we're actually attracting builders and having a lot of activity on the L1 as a result of all that? Yes, that absolutely matters. It matters that Solana got more new developers in the last year than the entire Ethereum L1 and L2 ecosystem. That concretely matters a lot. And all of that is downstream of this. It's just that obviously takes time. None of this matters for the price in the next few months. It's all longer term downstream of these things.
Well, talking about being concerned, Jon, what are your biggest concerns about Solana? Hit me.
So I go through a few of them. One is the MBV stuff, which people have finally started to realize more broadly now. I think Solana people were very well aware of this for the entire time. I don't think that most Ethereum people understood Solana well enough to be able to criticize it, and which is why I think the criticisms over the past year weren't so great when this is what I think one of the areas where I think Solana should have been criticized by a lot of Ethereum people, at least more fairly. So I think that is generally not great right now. It is in this mix of an area where I think a lot of Ethereans have warned about over the past few years, and why Ethereum took a different direction of, if you play out the current incentives right now, where, after Jito had pulled out the public mempool back in March, you're starting to get these kind of more private deals where you have these sandwichers who are making just a ton of money that these other validators are not making. And so my understanding is there's still some debate as far as the quantifying it exactly, what is their rate of growth compared to others as a result of this. But the very direct result is, as a result of not democratizing access to MBV, you have certain parties within Solana who are still hurting the users. They are sandwiching them anyway, not 100% of blocks, but they are sandwiching them a very meaningful amount. And as a result of that, they are gaining a disproportionate share of the network over time. And so if you roll that forward, what happens is this person who has access to more rewards than other people should over time just get effectively all the stake. And then there's a very, I'd say, meaningful debate around the edges of, okay, what is the exact quantity of that? Are we talking about this person is going to have, a super majority stake in a few years? Or is this, they're going to earn everyone by a little bit, but over 10 years and it's not that big a deal. Maybe we could more. In general, I think it's a rather serious problem. And I think most people in Solana kind of acknowledge that and know that something needs to change. And so there's different discussions around, do you add the public mempool back? It'll generally make sandwiching a little bit worse in the short term, but it'll democratize access and generally help decentralization of the validator set. I think it's a valid option. There's a meaningful discussion of, should we be whitelisting kind of the validators that you send transactions to, kind of more at the front end level of, we're not going to send it to known sandwichers. I think that's valid. I think there's also valid criticism of that does this look like censorship? So I think in general, the general MEV arena is, I think, a very fair area for criticism on Solana right now, where I think it can, and I do think it will improve over time. It's necessarily several years behind Ethereum and is much more willing to kind of just do things and see what happens, which is why, at the time, and we had done the podcast right after Jito worked out the public mempool. I was generally in the direction of neither of us thought that this was going to last very long, but I understood that, this is Solana, why not just try it and kind of see what happens? And maybe it'll help for a little while, maybe it won't, and you can kind of flip the switch back if it's a problem. And I think that's a fine attitude. I think it's obviously just not what Ethereum is going to do. But concretely, it's resulted in problems, which I think Solana will need to address. The other one I would say is an easy one, which we just talked on a little bit, was issuance. It's an interesting one. One is I again do think it will be fixed. There will be proposals to improve it over time. But in general, I think that Solana's issuance is not great. I think it's somewhere in the middle of most of the, issuance of the cost type arguments have over-argued what the problem is, which I think is incorrect. It's not as bad as people think it is there, but there are concretely downsides to having inflation that looks like Solana's, which I think is just honestly higher than it needs to be. Whether that's, the simple thing that people don't like, but it's tax inefficient potentially for a lot of people. If you have to claim that as income in a lot of jurisdictions, it's annoying. But I think the more concrete thing that probably matters more for, I'd say, like the app layer, is that the high issuance rate, particularly when, not everyone's going to be using LSTs, I think it generally makes it harder to get meaningful DeFi adoption and use of Sol, the asset, kind of throughout the ecosystem broadly. Using the far extreme examples of, we generally see ETH as a very liquid and broadly used asset throughout a lot of DeFi, a lot of LST adoption, stuff like that. And then on the other far end, you have Cosmos, which has a much higher staking rate. They're often 10, 20+%. And what happens on all these chains is there's basically no DeFi. And then everyone just stakes 90% of their tokens, and then nobody does anything on these chains. And so you kind of just get this stuck problem where there's an opportunity cost to use anything in DeFi. The asset doesn't move around. And what's the biggest asset on Solana by a lot? It's Sol. So you want people to use the thing. So lowering that, I think, is generally beneficial for most holders, most users, most applications on the chain. And I think it probably should be reduced over time. And it's interesting. Because I think on Ethereum, there's conversations to reduce the issuance there, and I actually don't think that they should probably reduce the issuance on Ethereum right now. I think there's this kind of cost benefit analysis that you need to do basically anytime there's some costs of, there's basically a loss in credible neutrality to some degree of, apps don't want to see they don't want it to look like, the devs are just tweaking the issuance whenever they want. And, it's really easy to change this thing. We don't know if this is a solid platform to build upon. In general, I think that's a higher cost to Ethereum right now. I think they have more credible neutrality to lose. And I think it's generally more valuable for them right now, with just where they are in their development. So I think there's a higher cost for Ethereum to do it. And then I think there's a lower benefit for Ethereum to do it. Because I think Ethereum's issuance right now is very good. Quite frankly, it's very low, very stable. The ecosystem looks very good. Versus Solana, I think there's a higher benefit to doing it because they have a much higher inflation rate. And I think that their DeFi ecosystem and the holders would actually benefit a lot more from this. But it's on the margin, I think it's clearly worth it for Solana to kind of have a smarter, more market-driven approach to issuance versus Ethereum's, I think, is actually quite good right now. So I think those are two of the simple ones. MEV stuff's not great on Solana right now. Issuance, I think, should change. And then the third one, I think is a fair point, is I think a little bit of what we talked about in the beginning is like Solana has real competition. I don't think that you can deny that. Like, we are nowhere near this end stage where we have a winner to the decentralized NASDAQ and we can crown them and call it a day. I think that there are absolutely valid competitors in chains like Hyperliquid, which I would say are more target built for even a more specific use case in certain ways, and make customizations as a result of, hey, we're going to prioritize cancel orders. Like this is good for market makers. They're going to get picked off less. This is going to get better execution to users. They're going to have an enshrined oracle. They're going to take even more centralization trade-offs to make the changes faster and more performant, all those things. That may be a better spot on the trade-off spectrum for a lot of users. Clearly a lot of people are using it. And then you have Base, which is, I would say, maybe not technically more interesting on really any dimensions, but they have a bunch of great distribution, and maybe they improve the tech over time, and then they just have the better distribution, and they kind of win out on all the uses over time. So I think it's a mix of those. Are probably three of the bigger things that are on my head today. Is the MEV stuff is not great, definitely needs to be fixed. The issuance stuff is not great, definitely needs to be fixed. I think both of those will be addressed quite well. And then the third part is just the competition. And you see that on both the technical side and kind of just the pure, corporate distribution type side, where Solana does have a lot of credible competitors, and that's not going to go away. You're going to have a lot of fast new chains, and it's going to be really hard for them to compete against those.
Well said. Well, the last two certainly have simpler answers: compete and win and reduce issuance. The first one is quite the little mind bender, as I've thought about it for a while now. I believe me and you were roughly the only people on Twitter at the time saying, oh, we should not have shut down the public mempool because people will instantly spin up something private. And I believe at the time, the thinking was that it would be very hard to do that. And from my position, since we do RPCs, I was basically saying, well, I think people will do this right away. And although we don't know the quantity or rate of growth of this person, so one thing I said in the last episode as well was, are these people going to take over the network in 5 months or 5 years? So it's very unclear, which makes proposing a solution more difficult, of course. And there are long-term solutions, things like MCP, but also obviously, like Tolly will say it's an engineering problem of reducing latency, and then perhaps Jito or Seg from Jito specifically will say it's not an engineering problem. Where do you, if you had a gun to your head and you had to propose a solution, assume that the interpretation of, let's say, this problem takes 2 years to become really bad. How would you encourage people to think about a solution?
So, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I'd say it's probably played out. I mean, roughly similar to how we expected at the time. My gut reaction at the time, remember when it came out, was just and it was. I listened back to the podcast that we'd done then too. I remember my gut reaction was, don't do this. Don't get rid of the public mempool. Particularly, I was colored by a lot of my Ethereum background. I've been told for the past few years this is obviously not going to work, so it's going to fall apart right away. And then my kind of second reaction to it was, why not try it? Like, at least we get some data out of this, quite frankly. It's a good experiment to run live and in the wild. My guess is it still will fall apart, but I don't know. Why not? Why not try it? Yeah, where you are now is, I mean, part of what I would think about is I still think that's like probably more directionally the correct attitude compared to Ethereum for where Solana is, which is be a little more willing to just go try stuff and see if it works, and be accepting of that, maybe this isn't the perfect long run equilibrium, this thing that we're doing right now, but, this seems like a good idea. We should try it, see what happens. So that is, I would say, directionally my kind of philosophical leanings whenever you're talking about Solana versus when I think you're talking about Ethereum. I think it makes sense to take a little more of a, how stable and robust is this going to be over time, and think really about the super long run. That being said, where Solana is right now, I mean, the main thing is I would want to see, similarly, I would want to see more concrete numbers on how bad is this, of how quickly are they out earning everyone, and how quickly are they going to take a disproportionate share of the network. My general gut level sense, based on where the balance is right now, is that it may well be worth adding back the public mempool. That like this problem is probably only going to get directionally worse, not better, if you don't do that over time. They're going to be out earning people by a lot, and other people are just going to, if it really is a lot of money, other people are going to be incentivized to start kind of doing the same thing too, as it is easier. And, kind of this deal has been broken to some degree of, this is the thing that people are doing and this is what we need to do to be competitive. So I think it may well be a valid idea to add back what Jito had before. And then you probably want to have, I would say, more app layer protections that are going to be added over time for users and really push to users a lot more. Problem is that is difficult to do. And generally those solutions are more permissioned. It does end up looking like, you're sending it to like Ethereum has more of this stuff where you're sending it privately to a builder or a handful of builders who are just promising, we're not going to front run you. We're going to give you good execution, stuff like that. It's a Band-Aid. It's not great. But it is in practice going to help a lot of users, and it'll probably make the network more decentralized on the validator side. They're not great long-term solutions, but I think those are directionally reasonable things based on my understanding of kind of the situation right now. If you were to say, like, if you got numbers that made it pretty clear, this is not a huge deal, this is still a small enough scale where they're not going to gain such a huge share of the network and other people are not joining in, then maybe you can drag it out longer without having to make serious changes, and you just focus on the more, push users at the app layer more and try to get, the whitelisting stuff to actually work. I don't know how hard that actually is to get all of these people to start agreeing on, who are the good validators, kind of integrating that. Does that end up being more kind of backroom deals anyway? But yeah, that's kind of my directional inclination on it. But yeah, I think it's very difficult to know without having any concrete data of exactly how much are these people earning. Like what is the quantum that we're talking about of dollars? Because I think that will shift the answer depending on what that is.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear kind of your follow up there. I guess I also want to put this in conversation with total economic value or real economic value, which are these metrics that you kind of wrote a blog piece that inspired Dan Smith at Blockworks to like create this dashboard that people in Solana love to tweet and get lots of engagement about when it sets new all-time highs on a weekly scale. And I saw a tweet from Ryan Watkins from Syncrasy, and he said, like, don't celebrate MEV like it's revenue, because this is, this metric includes maybe priority fees or something paid to sandwichers, and this will fall over time as Solana works out the wrinkles with MEV. And so basically, like, beware of this REV stat. This shouldn't be the North Star for like metrics. So you're a fan of this metric, but also you're concerned about sandwiching. So I'm just curious how you put those two things together.
Yeah, so it's a mix of I agree with a lot of the sentiment there. Of what it reminds me of to a meaningful degree is what I warned a lot of Ethereum people about when I wrote stuff like ETH is not ultrasound money. It felt very obvious to me that people were very strongly over-indexing on, oh, ETH is great because it's deflationary because of the burn. And my very simple reply to that was, one, I thought it was less important than people thought it was. This deflation thing doesn't matter as much as you think it does. But also, two, it was just kind of, all right, but what's going to happen when inevitably ETH is not deflationary for periods? Is it not money anymore? Did the thing fail? Did it not work? I think there's a degree of that here of, yeah, if you just super over index on, wow, Sol is great because our RV is way higher than everyone else. But then, if you just fix the MEV to a meaningful degree and, the chain's better for users and we reduce MEV a lot and the REV numbers go down a lot, does that mean that, Sol is less valuable now? And so there's a degree of you don't want to set yourself up for kind of a failure on that when you know that this is actually generally direction the end state that we want to go towards. I think it's fair. The main thing for me is I don't use REV as a valuation metric very simply for the most part, at least for these chains like I would say ETH and Sol, where say very clearly this is just, it's not what the market is valuing these things on. They do have these more, whatever you want to call them, meme value, store value, commodity value, utility value. It's some mix of all these different things. We're very clearly not just putting a multiple on, what's the REV going into the thing. I think they are a very useful statistic at minimum nonetheless, because very concretely, what are users paying for is just one of the better signals right now in crypto of what do users want to use. This is fundamentally just about the only non-symbolic metric. Not everything is entirely simple, but is at least among the least symbolic metrics of, hey, if users are paying a lot of money to use this thing, there's a very clear signal, like what do users place value on right now and what do they want to go use? And I think it's very fair to say that, this is not sustainable. Users can't keep getting ripped off like this. We need to improve this over time. That's great. But nonetheless, I think it's a very clear signal that the fact that this number is high on Solana right now is a very clear downstream result of the fact that people want to use Solana for priority access to state that they have right now. And that is a useful signal to us compared to other chains where users are clearly just not willing to pay. So I see it largely as that. It is just a useful signal of kind of user behavior. What do they place value on? Where are they going right now? I would be cautious of, touting this as, this is the reason why Sol should be valued at X, because I think it's going to be difficult to ever do that. And if you run the numbers today, you probably don't want to value Sol based on what the REV is even today, at what I would say are somewhat, unsustainable levels of this actually should reduce, because on margin, a lot of this is maybe not behavior that you want. or on the margin should start going back to users over time as you have more efficient apps that are sending back 90% of the MEV or whatever to users as opposed to leaking it to validators. But yeah, I think it's useful, but it's certainly valid. So yeah, I would be cautious about not saying that this is why we're valuing Sol. This is why it's super valuable right now. Is this exact multiple or number or anything?
I'll add some nuance to that as well. The REV numbers don't include the sandwiching from this bad actor. And I think a lot of people get this wrong because it's out of protocol. The REV counts Jito tips, which are what's required generally to land transactions fast. And that's roughly 80% of the value. And then priority fees. And in fact, if Jito enabled the public mempool, the REV number would increase because every validator would make money through sandwiching. And so I told Ryan in that response, those values don't reflect the other thing. And so things get confusing on Twitter. Jon, one thing I'm curious on, going to completely shift gears, is you're obviously an investor. One thing that I like to think of myself as a small investor as well. One thing I've been somewhat underwhelmed by recently is the new ideas coming forward in crypto. Everybody seems to be doing some of the same stuff. And then now there's AI agents. So actually, first, curious on your thoughts on what that meta is. But two, what are you looking for in terms of 2025? What sorts of ideas are you excited about?
So I would generally agree on to some degree, underwhelming ideas. And I mean, I think stuff like most of the AI agent stuff, I think I'd say 99% of it falls in the bucket of if you want to trade for the next year, there are probably a lot of really good trades here that make a lot of sense. If you're looking at, are these revolutionary ideas that I think are going to stick around for 5-10 years and actually make a lot of sense, are going to provide a lot of value over the long term? I think the answer is generally no for the majority of them. For most of the crypto AI type stuff, certainly not all of it. I'm sure the stuff around the edges that makes sense. Most of it, very clearly, though, is it's a good narrative for the next year. And I'd say that's a lot of hot stuff right now is just pretty transparently, it's a good narrative for the next year, but I don't know that this is something that's going to stick around for a long time. That gives me much less anxiety than it gives most other people. I have generally been on the directional side for most of my time, really all of my time in crypto, that I think that we generally know the things that crypto is pretty good at. And most of it looks like pretty simple stuff. And I'm fine with that because that pretty simple stuff is like pretty awesome and revolutionary and huge. Stuff like being able to just do simple private payments between people without intermediaries. Stuff like just very simple basic finance. If I just want to self-custody my funds and, be my own bank and get a few percent yield on that. I just want to have a store of value that's, not tied to the US dollar and I could just kind of keep. I think those are gigantic use cases that are obviously worth many trillions of dollars and will sit underneath a lot of apps. So I don't really get a lot of anxiety that we don't have a new NFTs are going to change the world or crypto gaming is the thing that's going to change the world in the next few years. Doesn't really give me a lot of anxiety. I think the basics are awesome and I just want to see those get built. So my general hope and the stuff I would say I would get excited for and want to see in the next couple of years more is that real stuff actually progressing a lot more. And so I think that a lot of that has certainly been, I would say, bottlenecked by a mix of infrastructure and regulatory clarity over the past few years, which I am hopeful now we are starting to get on the back end of that, where we're starting to really enter more of a period where, it's pretty easy for you to just have a chain that's super performant or just deploy it on another chain that's super performant. And that's not really an issue for you anymore that you have to spend all your cycles thinking about. And where, hey, if I launch a thing, I'm not afraid that I'm going to go to jail and I can actually service, most users in the world, including US users. I think that we are getting towards the back end of those things. And so then I am hopeful that those very simple things that I described are going to actually become viable and scalable over the next few years. Simple examples, one of the companies that we invested in recently, it was a company called Pay, which I believe you are too. I don't remember. But it's very simple. It is effectively an app specific rollup, which is private. And does payments and simple banking for users, and like that's it, and that's
Glow in
awesome.
the dark card.
Yes, very, very cool. But yeah, I mean, it's simple. It's, we have known that crypto is very good for sending money for a long time, but the fact that I could just have an app on my phone that feels like Venmo is great, and I could just send money to anyone across the world privately is awesome. And that's not something that's a new idea in the last 10 years. People have known about this the entire time. I was like, yeah, we really want to build that thing. But the rails are finally getting better. To be able to, you just go build, a purpose-built ZK rollup that they needed to go build. It's getting easier to just like, we can just have this scalable solution. We have more clarity on, we're able to provide this service to more people and like get people onboarded and get more integrations going because there's more regulatory clarity that, stable coins are okay. These things work. And so I'm excited that we're getting on the back end of hopefully, I want you to see real simple things like that like actually provide value to users in the world are just going to actually start to be a thing. That's finally the app that, you could show your mom and she'll understand it. It's going to work. And this obviously makes sense and shows what crypto is really good at. So it doesn't really give me a lot of anxiety that we don't have these, sexy new ideas that we could pitch to people outside of crypto of, this is this revolutionary new idea that we have of crypto gaming or AI or whatever. I think it's awesome what we know it can do is it's great at sending money to people around the world and doing basic finance. And that kind of underlies everything. So just getting good at that and getting particularly privacy more ingrained into that over the next few years, I think is going to be super important.
Jon, I think what you do well as a writer, and if there's people listening who want to get into writing blog posts or whatever, is you take maybe an unspoken assumption or a question that nobody's really answering that's just kind of open and you answer it in a really long form. So how should we value tokens? Is Ethereum building towards something concrete? And I just think that's why people really resonate with the things that you write. So I'm curious to ask as a closing question here, Jon, what other questions do you think are unsettled or unanswered? Like in the world of crypto today, what are maybe fodder for future blog posts for you or things that you think that everyone says, but they don't quite understand or are really underexplored?
One obvious one for me that I will do at some point, I haven't decided if it's my next thing or a couple of reports down, is probably going on to the Bitcoin scaling side. I think that there is a meaningful degree of both of those things I think there are a lot of unanswered questions, but I think that there's also a very big disconnect between what are the answered questions so far and what is most people's perception of the situation so far. So concretely, I mean, I think that most, Ethereum centric people are relatively unaware of most of the kind of like low level, what are the changes that's happened in kind of Bitcoin scaling technology over the past, call it year or two of what are the current iterations of building, trying to build trust minimized bridging for Bitcoin and building Bitcoin rollups. So I am certainly going to write about that at some point. I possibly will do that quite soon. It still falls very much in that bucket, though, of there absolutely are unanswered questions of, what exactly will some of this look like, particularly in the long run? Is Bitcoin going to software to add new opcodes back? Is it going to make any changes to improve these things over time? Should it? Why? What is the right scaling solution for Bitcoin over time? And I think that, the obvious unanswered questions on Bitcoin longer term, this stuff about security budget, which we're just going to kind of have to wait and see. But yeah, I think that most of the Bitcoin kind of scaling stuff is the stuff that I will probably be interested to write in at some point soon. I think there's a lot of open areas of research right now that people are working on, but where it is at a very real stage now, and stuff is going to ship in the next year that is approaching what Ethereum rollups look like. And I think that will probably surprise some people that it has progressed beyond this is just a multi-sig sidechain. That design is no longer the state of the art.
Final question. Assume you are the head of a task force for crypto research. What would be your number one writing tip for these aspiring Jon Charbonneaus?
Say the quiet parts out loud, be brutally honest about stuff, and just let that ride. Because if you are well thought out and you say stuff that you are not supposed to say, you'll generally be fine. A lot of people will get very annoyed at you. I'm used to that by now. Most people, I've gotten people who are very annoyed at me for, most of the posts that I've written over the past couple of years. If you prove yourself over time and the ideas are very well thought out, then the people that matter will very clearly see that, and you'll be fine. It is often hard to do those things in the short term because, I don't know, it's scary that you're going to get a bunch of people who are pissed off at you, and particularly if you are an investor, that is like generally not a good thing. You would prefer if everyone just loved you and it was super easy to go talk to anyone, get any investment in any area. But in general, I think that over the long term, if you actually have well thought out ideas, even saying the quiet parts out loud and getting different communities annoyed at you at times is going to be worth it. And that is possibly the only way to actually build up any meaningful respect over time. Because I think it's impossible effectively in crypto to have cross-domain knowledge, comment intelligently cross-domain, and not piss off a lot of people. I don't think that is possible. I don't think there is anyone in crypto who has a deep understanding across these ecosystems, comments frequently on Solana, comments frequently on Ethereum, Celestia, Bitcoin, all of them, is positive on all of them, is critical on all of them, and doesn't get any strong pushback from any subsets of the communities. And I think you have to be willing to take that. Because if you don't, the only things that you will say are the non-controversial and boring things. You will just say, like everything is great, this thing is going up. Which is why, as a result, I actually end up with a more negative tone, I think, at times in a lot of my writing, because I think that more of the unspoken things in crypto are people that are afraid to be critical of things, particularly of their own investments. I'm very critical of a lot of the Ethereum stuff lately. Most of my biggest investments in the fund, and certainly personally, are in the Ethereum ecosystem. So I think that you have to be willing to do that, because otherwise you won't say anything interesting. If you're just only willing to be positive over time, people won't take you seriously. You won't say anything interesting over time.
That's all the time we have for today. But Jon, thank you so much for coming on the pod. Always great to get three bearded guys together to talk about crypto for an hour or so. Looking forward to reading, all the Bitcoin scaling stuff as it comes, and we'll have to get you back on the show soon. Really appreciate you taking the time.
It's a ton of fun. Appreciate it, guys.